soon. Your adventure is just beginning.
As our train climbs to higher ground and we look back to leave 21st century Sault Ste. Marie behind. A short way into our journey, the landscape will change dramatically as we enter the southern margins of the Canadian or pre-Cambrian Shield. As we pass into and through this country, in a very real sense, we will be journeying back in time, traveling back some 3,500 million years to a time when the molten Earth was still cooling and the thin, 30-mile thick skin of our planet was forming like the crust on a pudding. Imagine going back to this almost unimaginably ancient time, an era that lasted so long it accounts for fully 4/5 of the entire time the Earth has existed. In this distant age, before the continents as we know them today had separated and formed, there was only one ocean and one supercontinent. In the north, this continent, which was racked by earthquakes and never-ending storms, a fiery belt of hundreds of huge volcanoes appeared. These volcanoes, the most ancient on Earth, spewed up layers upon layers of spreading, red-hot oceans of molten lava that grew very slowly between eruptions, bringing breathtaking chains of towering new mountains into being. These mountains were the first part of what would later become North America, to be permanently elevated above the grasp of the sea, reaching up 12,000 kilometers, or 39,000 feet, higher than the Himalayas today. They touched the sky. They would eventually cover half the landmass of the future Canada in a shield-shaped arc of granite that extended from what is now northern Wisconsin and New York State in the south, to the Arctic Ocean in the Northwest Territories, and to Labrador and Greenland in the northeast. These ancient mountains form the foundational core of the North American continent. Like all mountains, they had deep roots, reaching down into the center of the earth, hidden like the underwater bulk of sky-high icebergs. As awe-inspiring as these great mountains were, however, even they could not stand against time. Uplifted repeatedly, deformed and torn down by titanic geological forces, buried periodically for endless eons beneath the bulk of mile-high glaciers, scoured brutally and scraped clean to bare rock by the crushing fist of rivers of ice, they would eventually erode away, bit by bit, until only their exposed bedrock remained. The heat and pressure within these once-ago mountains were ideal for the process of mineralization, and over time, they became one of the world's treasure troves of nickel, gold, silver, platinum, copper, uranium, and even diamonds. All this happened so long ago that 1 billion years would have to pass before the first life emerged detected from the seas. Today we call this land the Canadian Shield. These are the oldest rocks in Canada, among the oldest in the world in fact, and they are covered today by only the thinnest soils. In what would be the distant future, this uncompromising landscape would shape the history of Canada and test and temper the character of our people.
Hi, Kathy here again. We would ask that you be very careful when moving about the train, especially when going from one coast to the next. We will be traveling today at speeds up to 64 kilometers, or 40 miles per hour. Considering the curvature of the track and the mountainous country through which we will be traveling, you will need to be careful so a sudden lurch doesn't catch you off guard. When traveling between cars, you will note that the doors open automatically when you push the red button, located where you would expect the door handle to be. The doors will remain open for 9 seconds to allow you to pass through, before closing automatically behind you. I would also like to draw your attention to the special emergency exit windows in each car. These can be distinguished by the red handles located along the bottom of the windows. Instructions for operating these emergency exits are to be found above each designated window. We ask that you please familiarize yourself with these safety features. I must caution you that the water dispensed in the restrooms is not for consumption. It is intended only for hygienic and cleaning purposes. Drinking water can be purchased in the dining car and at takeout snack areas. In accordance with the federal government legislation, the Agawa Canyon train tour is a smoke-free environment. All passengers and employees are required to respect this legislation and to refrain from smoking while on board. This non-smoking policy is strictly enforced. Should the railway incur a fine or fines as a result of any smoking infraction, the dollar value of those fines will be passed on to the person or persons violating the government legislation. Thank you for not smoking. If you are in a coach equipped with overhead storage, we ask, for your personal safety, that you place items in the overhead racks so that they lie flat and are not piled on top of each other. This is to prevent items from being inadvertently dislodged by the motion of the train. Transport Canada prohibits passengers from standing or riding in the vestibule areas between the coaches of the train. This regulation is strictly enforced, and we ask passengers to please comply with it.
That come and go. The Great Lakes, for example, only came into being at the end of the last ice age, some 10,000 years ago. Geologically speaking, that's just yesterday. What made the formation of the Great Lakes possible actually started at least 1,100,000,000 years earlier. At that time, two of North America's previously fused plates, the huge rafts of crust and upper mantle that comprise the fractured surface of the Earth, began to split apart at about the same rate that fingernails grow, and the land fell away along what we now call the Mid-Continent Rift, a fault similar to the Great Rift Valley in Africa. Eventually, this split in the Earth filled in slow motion, with great upwellings of solidifying lava. In most cases, rifts like this continue to split apart until they eventually flood with water and become oceans. This one didn't. Unaccountably, the separating plates stopped pulling apart a mere 20 million years after they had begun to open, leaving behind a rift valley trough 150 kilometers or 90 miles wide and 1,500 kilometers or 900 miles long. It is the deepest healed rift yet discovered that did not give birth to an ocean. It would form the basin for the future Lake Superior. Conveniently, 500 million years later, a second fault line to the east, known as the St. Lawrence Rift, also failed, making possible the future formation of Lakes Erie and Ontario, and the St. Lawrence River. During a later cycle of global climate change, some 1.2 million years ago, temperatures began to drop, snow began to fall, and ice began to build up unendingly, century upon century, until the towering Laurentide ice sheet covered more than 11 million square kilometers, or 7 million square miles, of North America, up to 2 kilometers or a mile and a quarter thick. This ice sheet depressed the land beneath its immense weight. Across the span of thousands of years, as the glaciers periodically advanced like slow-motion waves, they ground down and pulverized the once mighty mountains that covered the Great Lakes region, leveling the hills and scraping the land to bedrock. Alternately, as they retreated across the millennia, huge volumes of meltwater were released across the shifting ice fronts, deepening and enlarging the ancient basins created in previous eras, carving out the Mississippi and the Great Lakes systems. As the melting ice created glacial lakes many times larger than their size today, the unburdened rock, released from the weight of the ice, rebounded upward, raising the Great Plateau whose bordering highlands still trace the shape of the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes today contain 20% of the world's fresh water. Since the end of the last Wisconsin glaciation 10,000 years ago, outflowing waters from Lake Superior have been plunging 7 meters or 23 feet into the 97-kilometer or 60-mile-long waterway of the St. Mary's River on their way to Lakes Huron and Michigan. Thanks to billions of years of geological transformation, the rapids created by this difference in elevation between the Great Lakes became the starting point for all of the human history of the Algoma region.
Seahorses.
How do you feel about this tour?
It's really beautiful, especially in fall. As you see, fall colors are coming up, and you're getting a view of high country, mountains and hills. It really soothes you and relaxes you, and gives the perfect escape from the rat race life in the city. An escape into serenity and peace and nature.
Northern Ontario lakes have, for such a long time, been capturing the hearts of fishermen, hook, line, and sinker. The Searchmont Mill closed in the early 1990s, but rather than give up and allow their town to fade away, the people of this community rallied and reinvented Searchmont as a ski resort and recreation area. Today, Searchmont Resort boasts 4 chairlifts on 18 runs, with a respectable vertical drop of 213 meters, or 700 feet. Visitors are attracted by the downhill and cross-country skiing, dog sledding, fishing, hiking, canoeing, and mountain biking.
Right there in the ski trails. It will take you all the way to the top of the mountain. And you can, there's a hotel, you can stay there. And you go in a skyscraper.
Oh, this is a bridge.
That's Gula River.
Oh.
Traditional meeting place, Awading or Bawading, meaning shallow waters rushing over stones. It was here in 1622 that 17-year-old Etienne Brulé and his company of adventurers first encountered the Ojibwe, and vice versa. Brulé had been sent by Samuel de Champlain, the founder of New France, to search for the fabled westward route to the treasures of the Orient, but he also kept his eyes wide open for possible copper mines. One huge piece of native copper discovered during his travel is still on display at the Smithsonian in Washington. Brulé put his stamp on history by promptly discovering Lake Superior and then renaming the native settlement Sault de Gaston. Sault is the old French word for waterfall, and Gaston was the brother of King Louis. During what remained of his short, savage life, Brulé would be captured by the Senecas, denounced by Champlain for treasonously selling out his services to the English enemy, and finally ended his days in 1632 at the hands of the Hurons of Georgian Bay. In 1641, two Jesuit missionaries, Fathers Raimbolt and Jogues, arrived at the Sioux. These two black robes immediately renamed the settlement Sault Ste. Marie in honor of the Virgin Mary. The name stuck. It would take another 30 years for the French to make their claim official. On June 24, 1671, in a ceremony at the north end of the rapids, attended by thousands of people from 14 First Nations, Simon Francois Daumont erected a cross and finally took formal possession of what he called the Western Domains in the name of King Louis XIV. Based on the principle that if you're going to make a claim, it might as well be a big one. The domains claimed by France included the Great Lakes and the length and breadth of all territories discovered and yet to be discovered. To commemorate the occasion, 289 years later, in May of 1960, St. Mary's College Men's Club erected a 37-meter or 121-foot illuminated cross on Moffley Hill, where Daumont's original cedar cross had been raised. This is believed to be the tallest illuminated, self-supporting cross in the Western Hemisphere. The Sioux's advantageous location made it a very important place during the 18th century. The trapping prowess of the Ojibwe and the lust for profit that fueled the fur trade of the Northwest Company and later their rivals, the Hudson Bay Company, meant that the territory earned great profits for France, that is until 1763, when the French were forced to cede the land to their English enemy as a result of losing the 7 Years' War in faraway Europe. Quel dommage. C'est la vie. What a shame. But hey, that's life.
You've undoubtedly noticed how the landscape changed in the past few miles. That change has signaled our entry into the Canadian Shield Country that Matt spoke about earlier. The look of this land will be immediately familiar to those of you familiar with the iconic paintings of the Canadian landscape artists known as the Group of Seven. I'll be telling you more about them a little later, but I'd like to draw your attention to the small waterway that has been meandering alongside the track. This is Achigan Creek, and it is typical of the kind of streams with quiet pools interspersed with chutes or rapids that thread throughout this country. for smallmouth bass and lake trout. During the 1920s and 30s, some of the trout landed here weighed in at almost 14 kilograms or 30 pounds. That's what you call at least a fish fry and a half. That was the era when the Agawa Central began building cottage retreats along here. Back then, those cottages rented for $2 a day. The cottages and those prices are long gone now, but many private camps are still located in this area, as is the Stokely Creek Ski Resort, well known for its cross-country skiing.
How did you the ski
From the mountain. Come down.
on the mountain? But it will not
Snow.
not smooth, right?
It'll be smooth.
Surface is not smooth.
Because of the
It is
snow.
it is not ice ski. But,
Hatchery, back in the Sioux. Each year, the hatchery produces about 1.4 million lake trout, brook trout, and splake to replenish the lakes for avid fishermen. Ojidaki is Ojibwe for top of the hill, and Mount Ojidaki, for which the lake is named, is the largest hill in the area. Though unfortunately not visible from our train, it is one of the highest points in all of Ontario. In fact, at a height of 666 meters, or 2,184 feet, it is about 122 meters, or 400 feet, higher than Toronto's CN Tower, which was the world's tallest building between 1975 and 2007.
Meanwhile, back in the 1760s, no sooner had the victorious British deposed the French and assumed control of the Sioux region as a trophy of their victorious war in Europe. Dissatisfied British colonials south of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River started their revolution and shortly thereafter won their independence as newly minted American states. Needless to say, the British North Americans hastily declared an international border down the center of the St. Mary's River. Strong fences, they say, make for good neighbors, but invisible borders, especially those out on a wilderness frontier, are notoriously elastic and particularly porous. The British Royal Engineers, recognizing the threat posed by the newly minted Americans who could easily decide to deny them access to the important portage on the South Shore, proposed that a cart road be built along the North Shore, and also, significantly, a navigable canal served by a set of locks. Of course, no one was motivated enough to act on this proposal until 1797, when the British, who had recently been forced to withdraw from the American South Shore, finally surveyed a North Shore site for a trading post. Over the next year, they also constructed the Suez Canal system to accommodate boats and canoes. All went more or less well between the neighbors until the War of 1812. Well, actually, until 2 years into the war, when British merchants from the Sioux took part in the capture of the American fort at Michilimackinac. Naturally, the Americans retaliated in July by seizing the post and sawmill established by the Northwest Company. No one knows for certain whether the deed was done by the invading Americans or by the British scuttling their own enterprise, but during the retaliation, the post was somehow destroyed, and along with it, the canal and the lock. 2 years later, the lock was rebuilt in stone, and though the canal reopened, it was still only capable of serving what remained of the declining fur trade. A larger and more commercially viable ship canal was completed in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, in 1855. This enabled grain, coal, iron ore, and steel to be transported from around Lake Superior to markets worldwide. In 1870, international tensions centered in the Sioux were once again fanned almost to flame when the Americans, whose Fenian invasions north had recently been repelled, denied access to their canal to soldiers and supplies sent by the Canadian government to the Red River in an attempt to quell the real rebellion. Recognizing the strategic importance of having a Canadian lock, it only took the Canadian government 25 years to build a new canal and lock on the Canadian side. Opened in 1895, it was the first lock to be illuminated and operated by electricity and for many years was the longest in the world. The 4 larger locks on the Michigan side of the rapids, which together handled the traffic of more than 10,000 ships each year, long ago surpassed and overshadowed the smaller Canadian canal. which did yeoman service until 1987, when ice damage to its southwest wall made the old lock unsafe. When the Canadian lock reopened, its days of providing passage to commercial ships were over. It now handles only recreational boating traffic. Like the rapids it had been built to bypass, the venerable old canal and locks, now a Canadian National Historic Site, did their job and in the process put the Sioux on the world map.
Lumber.
Yeah.
To dry up and cut pieces.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now approaching the Montreal River, where we will cross our highest trestle. For your viewing enjoyment, our train will reduce speed. The Montreal River trestle is curved and is 472 meters, or 1,550 feet, long. It is 42 meters, or 130 feet, to the top of the dam, and 91 meters, or 300 feet, to the river below. On seeing the trestle, you can imagine how much of a challenge this broad, deep valley presented to the builders of the railway. Track was laid across the viaduct in October of 1911. When we pull out onto the trestle, you will have a spectacular view to the left and below of the Montreal River Valley and the Mackay Generating Station. To your right, you will see the Montreal River Reservoir. The original Mackay Generating Station was built in 1935. In 1957, a third generating unit was added, and the dam was raised to its present height. There are 3 additional power dams further down the river. Today, the Mackay Generating Station is capable of producing 61 megawatts of power, enough to supply 1/3 of the city of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. But hydroelectric generation is only one of the renewable green technologies being implemented in Algoma. The latest advances in solar power, wind generation, industrial power cogeneration, and the conversion of carbon-based biomass into syngas are in the works, contributing to the Sioux becoming the renewable energy capital of North America. Once over the trestle, we will climb the bluffs above the river, and at mile 94, we will have an excellent view of the dam and trestle back to your right. At that point, we will be 487 meters, or 1,600 feet, above sea level, which is the highest point on the railway.
his empire, Francis Clerc returned to the Sioux only once, on Discovery Day, August 5th, 1923, when he was invited to lay the cornerstone of a cenotaph, was named an honorary Ojibwe chief by the local band, and was celebrated at a dinner by the 119th Battalion. His empire collapsed before it had a chance to realize its full potential, but his vision had been inspired, and the component parts of his enterprise were perfect. Power generation, pulp and paper manufacturing, steel making, and railway transportation. These were the building blocks of Clerc's empire, and they did not disappear when his empire collapsed. They survived, endured, and flourished. Think back to when we were leaving the station this morning, and remember the Francis H. Clerc Power Station, the St. Mary's Paper Mill, and the SR Steel Algoma plant we passed along the way. Think about the very railway we are traveling on now. These industries remain the foundation of the economic life of the Sioux. They stand as testament not to the force of one man's dream, but to the vitality and commitment of generations of dreamers who have loved this Algoma country, who recognize the unlimited potential of this land, have cherished its beauty, and who continue to choose to invest their lives and their energies to making the Sioux and Algoma the home they are proud of. As you explore the living geography of Agawa Canyon today, as you stand in this rimmed valley beside a river that is still carving its way to Lake Superior through the heart of Creek-neighboring Stone, reflect for a moment on the forces of nature and human history that have brought this region and the Sioux into being, and that will sustain them into a future yet to be written. The land and the city and the land, they are of a piece, intrinsically connected, inseparable.
Be very careful. Okay, let's go, let's go.
Oh, that's where she is.
Video will be better. Moving train. Picture might be blurry. Take a video. It'll be hard. What?